to go to the rescue for the people, they can find out.
India has emerged as a major diplomatic force at the world stage.
The rising cost of living in Nigeria continues to impact citizens from all walks of life.
The citizens of Gujarat witnessed a mega roadshow here in the city of Ahmedabad.
China is South Africa's largest trading partner for 134 years straight.
A domestic aircraft carrying 72 people on board crashed in Pokhara city in central Nepal.
165 injured have been moved. 61 people are confirmed dead and rescue operations continue around me.
After receiving an entire season's rainfall in a span of 48 hours, Chennai city has literally been brought to its knees.
For WION, World is One.
Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. You're watching WION World is One. My name is Priyanka Sharma. Here are the headlines. US Vice President Kamala Harris calls on Hamas to agree to an immediate 6-week ceasefire, also urges Israel to do more to boost aid deliveries into Gaza, says the innocent are suffering from a human catastrophe. Economists watch out closely as China begins its annual parliamentary meetings called the Two Sessions. Government officials will set the yearly policy agenda and the annual growth target in the meet. Russian media reports say the foreign ministry has summoned German ambassador over the leaked military audio called row. In the purported call, German officers were heard discussing weapons for Ukraine and a potential strike by Kyiv on a bridge in Crimea. Nepal's Prime Minister Pushpa Kamal Dahal holds talks with two opposition parties to form a new coalition. His allies say there have been difficulties with his present partner, the centrist Nepali Congress Party. South Korea to take steps to suspend the licenses of striking trainee doctors who denied orders to return to work. Around 9,000 junior doctors walked out nearly 2 weeks ago to protest against an increase in medical school admissions from next year. A 7-judge constitution bench of the Indian Supreme Court overturns a 1998 ruling, says lawmakers are not immune from bribery charges in connection to vote or speech in parliament or state assemblies. And Joaquin Niemann continues his red-hot form. The Chilean registers a 4-shot win at Live Golf's Jeddah Invitational to clinch his second title in 3 starts this season. Our top focus at this hour, mediators in Cairo made a renewed push for a Gaza ceasefire, but differences remained as fighting raged on Sunday between Israeli forces and Hamas militants. The Palestinian territory continues to be gripped by desperate food shortages, and the US Vice President called for a proposed 6-week ceasefire deal to be accepted. Kamala Harris also criticized Israel over insufficient aid deliveries into Gaza.
The immense scale of suffering in Gaza, there must be an immediate ceasefire. For at least the next 6 weeks, which is what is currently on the table.
Kamala Harris's comments were the strongest to date by a U.S. administration official on Israel. A U.S. official said Israel had broadly accepted the deal, which would see a 6-week cessation of hostilities if Hamas agrees to release the most vulnerable hostages. Calling on Hamas to accept the deal, Harris said it will get the hostages out and get a significant amount of aid in. She added, Hamas claims it wants a ceasefire. Well, there is a deal on the table, and as we have said, Hamas needs to agree to that deal. Harris is due to meet with Benny Gantz, a centrist member of Israel's war cabinet, in Washington. The former Israeli military chief, a long-time rival of Netanyahu, will also meet White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. An official from Netanyahu's far-right Likud party said that Gantz's trip was planned without authorization from the Israeli leader. Speaking to media, the official said that Netanyahu had a tough talk with Gantz and told him the country has just one prime minister. The Egyptian state-linked media reported on Sunday that envoys from the US, Qatar and Hamas arrived in Cairo. It marked the latest effort towards a 6-week truce, stepped up aid deliveries and the exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners. But sticking points remained, including a Hamas demand that Israeli forces entirely withdraw from the Gaza Strip after almost 5 months of a devastating war. And Israel, which has so far announced no plans to join the Egypt talks, has demanded Hamas provide it with a list of 130 remaining captives, including over 30 who are now feared dead. The public broadcaster aired a recording of hostage Alon Shamri's calling for help during a battle between Israelis and Hamas, holding him and 2 others captive. As per the Israeli media, the audio was obtained from a GoPro camera mounted on a dog from the military's Oked's canine unit. The unit was sent into the building where hostages Shamri's, Yotam Haim and Samar Talalka were held. The dog was killed by Hamas during the battle. The camera was only recovered days later after Israeli troops mistakenly killed the 3 escaped hostages in another area of Gaza. U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein's Beirut visit will continue diplomatic efforts which are aimed at de-escalating the conflict across the Lebanese-Israeli border and bringing stability. The Iran-backed Lebanese group Hezbollah and Israel have been locked in hostility for months now, and all this is happening in parallel to the Gaza war. It has marked the worst conflict between the heavily armed adversaries since a 2006 war, fueling fears of a bigger confrontation. Despite the latest push to halt the fighting sparked by Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel, there was no let-up in Israeli bombing and urban Gaza combat. Several airstrikes were reported in southern Gaza's Rafah and Khan Yunis. The Israeli military announced the death of 1 more soldier in Gaza, bringing to 246 the number killed in ground operations. In Rehovot, Israel, where there were tears and ceremonial gunshots at the funeral of another soldier, Afik Teri. The Hamas media office reported intense tank shelling in northern Gaza, and the Israeli military said it hit about 50 targets, including underground infrastructure. For more inputs, we are now being joined by our correspondent Jody Cohen from Renana. Jody, welcome to WION. My first question, how close are Hamas and Israel to a deal?
Hi, Priyanka. So over the weekend, US President Biden had said that he was hoping for a deal to be reached by Ramadan, which starts on the 10th of March. Now, an unnamed Hamas official has said to the Wall Street Journal that he believes perhaps a deal can be reached by the week after. And Egyptian media are reporting significant progress towards the talks. However, Israel didn't send another negotiating team to Egypt for the talks. And an Israeli official said that's because Hamas refused to supply a list of which of the 134 Israeli hostages are still alive, as well as details of how many Palestinian security prisoners Hamas wants released for every hostage freed. Now, Israel believes that negotiations can't advance without that information. Israel is also reportedly not convinced that Hamas actually intends to reach a deal, and instead is suggesting that perhaps Hamas would prefer to see violence escalate over Ramadan. Now, we know that Hamas has called on Palestinians to march on Al-Aqsa during Ramadan, and also called on Iran and its proxies to carry out more attacks against Israel. And it remains to be seen what happens with these talks.
Talks also going on today. What can you tell us about Benny Gantz's visit to the US and the UK?
Right, so on Monday, War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz is meeting with US Vice President Harris and top US officials before he goes on to the UK on Tuesday for more meetings. Now, according to a report, Gantz is taking this trip without Prime Minister Netanyahu's prior approval. Now, we know that polls show that Gantz has a significant lead over Netanyahu and would win an election, according to the polls, if an election was held today. President Biden has also said that he believes Israel would lose support if it maintains what he has called Israel's incredibly conservative government. Now, Netanyahu's considered right-wing. Benny Gantz is right-wing but is considered more centrist. And Netanyahu is said to have reminded Gantz before this trip that there's only one prime minister. We also know the US envoy Amos Hochstein is visiting Israel and Lebanon on Monday to try to ease tensions with Hezbollah. Remember, Hezbollah has been firing rockets into Israel since the 8th of October, which is the day after Hamas's massacre when they killed 1,200 Israelis. And the IDF has been retaliating against Hezbollah targets. So it remains to be seen if any truce is agreed between Israel and Hamas, and if that could be extended to include Hezbollah as well.
Right, Jody, thank you so much for all those updates, and thanks for joining us on WION at this hour. Meanwhile, on Sunday, the German foreign minister accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of trying to sow disunity with the wiretap leak of a confidential German army discussion on the Ukraine war. The developments come at a time when Berlin is under pressure to supply the Taurus missile to Kyiv. A 38-minute recording of the talks was posted on Russian social media, with the participants discussing the possible use of German-made Taurus missiles and their potential impact. Topics included aiming the missiles at targets such as a key bridge over the Kerch Strait that links the Russian mainland to Crimea, which was annexed by Russia in 2014. The discussions also cover the use of long-range missiles provided to Kyiv by France and Britain. The German defense minister said this is clearly about undermining unity. It's about driving our domestic politics apart, and I very much hope that Putin will not succeed in this. Germany's ARD broadcaster described the leak as a catastrophe for the German secret services. According to Der Spiegel magazine, the video conference was held on the WebEx platform and not on a secret internal army network. Pistorius, meanwhile, said that he was not aware of any further leaks at the army and added that he would await the result of a military probe into the case before drawing any conclusions. Kyiv has long been clamoring for Germany to provide it with Taurus missiles, which can reach targets up to 500 kilometers away. Chancellor Olaf Scholz has so far refused to send missiles, fearing that it would lead to an escalation of the war with a nuclear-armed Russia. With the war in Ukraine in its third year, Kyiv has ramped up its pleas for more military support from allies. On the front lines, its soldiers are outgunned and outnumbered, and ammunition shortages are being felt. The acquisition of Taurus missiles would provide a massive boost for Ukraine as Kyiv struggles to fend off Russia's invigorated push on the front lines. France and Britain have supplied Kyiv with Scalp or Storm Shadow missiles, both of which have a range of about 250 kilometers. Scholz said Germany could not justify matching British and French moves in sending long-range missiles to Ukraine. He said, and I quote, "This is a very long-range weapon, and what the British and French are doing in terms of targeting and supporting cannot be done in Germany." Britain has denied that it had any direct involvement in operating the missiles. A Ministry of Defense spokesperson said Ukraine's use of Storm Shadow and its targeting processes are the business of the armed forces of Ukraine. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, now deputy head of the Security Council, said that Germany is preparing for war with Russia. Speaking at a diplomatic forum in Turkey on Saturday, Russian Foreign Minister said the recording indicated Ukraine and its backers do not want to change their course at all. Lavrov stated Kyiv and its Western allies want to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield. With politicians in Germany urging answers over the wiretap, Pistorius warned that the leak is part of an information war that Putin is carrying out. He said, and I quote, "We should not fall for Putin's line."
Es ist Teil eines Informationskrieges.
This incident is clearly more than just the interception and publication of a conversation in the Air Force sector. It is a part of an information war that Putin is waging. There is no doubt about that. It is a hybrid attack aimed at disinformation.
Aber nicht weniger entschlossen.
Meanwhile, Russia says Ukraine has attacked the country with a barrage of rockets. Russian officials say 38 drones have been shot down in the last 24 hours, while a series of explosions have rocked Crimea after a reported Ukrainian drone attack on the peninsula. One of the blasts allegedly took place near a fuel depot in the southeastern city of Feodosia. The Kerch Bridge, which connects Crimea with Russia, was temporarily closed. Crimea was annexed by Russia back in 2014. Russia has not reported any damage from the latest attack in the region. Meanwhile, the death toll in a Russian drone attack on an apartment building in southern Ukrainian city of Odessa has risen to 12. Officials say 5 of the dead in the attack were children, the youngest being just 4 years old. The drone had crashed into a residential building on Odessa. Ukraine also says Russian forces have wounded 16 people in an aerial bomb attack on an apartment building in the eastern town of Kurakov. President Zelensky says casualties could have been avoided if Ukraine had not faced delays in arms deliveries. Ukraine continues to urge allies to boost arms supplies. Russian troops have recently made gains in Ukraine as Kyiv struggles to sustain its forces with Western-made arms. Moscow last month took control of the key eastern town of Avdiivka. In a dramatic political shift in Britain, the Reform UK party had its highest ever polling numbers of 14 percentage points. Now, this party, led by Richard Tees, is only 6 points behind the Tories. For the Tories, the fall in the polling numbers comes after the suspension of Lee Anderson for his controversial remarks about London Mayor Sadiq Khan. According to a recent YouGov survey, Reform UK surged from just 1 percentage point just last week to 14% support now. The YouGov poll says that Conservatives are at 20 percentage points, with Labour leading at 46%. The poll was conducted on February 28th and 29th. It indicated that Reform UK had benefited from the Conservative Party's suspension of Anderson. Anderson, the Member of Parliament from Ashfield, was suspended after he refused to retract his remarks. He had implied that Islamists had quote-unquote gotten control of Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London City. Anderson even added that Sadiq Khan had given London away to his mates. Sadiq Khan had responded to Anderson's comments, accusing him of quote-unquote pouring fuel on the fire of anti-Muslim hatred. He emphasized the alarming increase in anti-Muslim cases, calling for condemnation from the cabinet. Despite the Reform UK success in recent polling, scepticism remains about their electoral impact. In the recent Rochdale by-election, the Reform UK party recorded only 6.3% votes. George Galloway of the Workers' Party of the UK won the Rochdale by-election with a pro-Palestinian campaign. Experts have underlined that Reform UK needs to mobilise support for future elections. Moving on, to strengthen his ailing Conservative Party before the election, Jeremy Hunt must provide eye-catching tax cuts in his yearly budget next week. That even as the UK public finances are fragile. A Bloomberg report quoting sources showed that on March 6, the Chancellor of the Exchequer will announce personal tax cuts of at least 1 percentage point of either the basic rate of income tax or the national insurance. The sources claim that Hunt and Prime Minister Sunak want to go further. However, economic forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility will take the final decision. Given a weak economic starting point, Hunt has struggled to find the money for voter-pleasing giveaways. The OBR has said he has £13 billion or $16.4 billion of breathing space before he breaks his fiscal rule to reduce the national debt in 5 years. Hunt will want to keep part of that margin, which is around record lows. To increase his budget, he's considering removing the non-domicile tax status and expanding a windfall tax on oil and gas industry revenues. Hunt's issues exacerbated by the Tories' polling woes. After months of trailing the Labour Party by 20 points, Sunak must call an election by January. The budget may be the Conservatives' final significant chance to reverse that narrative. However, they might host their annual conference in October and release an autumn statement before a vote later in winter. After months of trailing the Labour Party by 20 points, Sunak must call an election by January. The budget may be the Conservatives' final significant chance to reverse that narrative. However, they might host their annual conference in October and release an autumn statement before a vote later in winter.